This is a reading from the book entitled The Diary of Jesus by Jean Aulagnier. It's a day-by-day account of Jesus' life based on ancient calendars and on the writings of Maria Valtorta. This book features the historical background of Palestine from 63 BC to AD 70, all four Gospels, except for parallel passages, quoted in their chronological order, a large folding map of Palestine and Jerusalem as they were in Jesus' time, a summary of Maria Valtorta's 4,000-page narrative of Jesus' life, the poem of the man God. This is the cover, the front cover. The back cover says, "To give a day-by-day description of Jesus' life would seem a rather impossible undertaking. This is, of course, one's first reaction. Yet that task is precisely what Mr. Jean Aulagnier has managed to perform. He worked on this for 5 years, including 2 years on calendar conversions alone. The author, a staunch Catholic, is a graduate from l'École Polytechnique, the most prestigious scientific school in France. He is rigorous and precise in his scientific analyses. He is convinced that God does give mankind profound supernatural answers to dispel our spiritual doubts. For several years now, the author has spent all his free time researching the history of God's relationship with the human race. In his research, he has concentrated on the first century of Christianity. At one time, the author was told about an extraordinary piece of writing consisting of over 10,000 handwritten pages. It proved to contain over 4,000 data, mostly about Jesus' public ministry. He ascertained that these data perfectly matched the most up-to-date historical, archaeological, astronomical, cartographical, and climactic data. The author was told that Pope Pius XII knew of this writing when the task of composing it had barely begun, 1944. Shortly after its April 28, 1947 completion, Pius XII was handed a typed copy of the entire work. Less than 1 year later, on February 26, 1948, Pius XII granted it the imprimatur. Jean Aulagnier was told that the woman who wrote this inspired text was a poor, disabled woman. Her writings were filled with details that only specialists in various disciplines could possibly know. Yet, she only had an average education. Finally, Mr. Aulagnier found that everything that this woman wrote is in perfect harmony with the Gospels, so much so that it was possible to date every chapter and every verse of the Gospel. How could he resist sharing the results of his discoveries?" The Diary of Jesus, day-by-day account of Jesus' life based on ancient calendars and on the writings of Maria Valtorta. Get to know him as he was yesterday, to love him more today. Introduction. All Christians have felt at some time or other the need to know more about the Gospels. We may wonder about the context in which they were written. What were the authors like? When did they write? How historically accurate are the Gospels? Unfortunately, we always feel that our answers to these questions are more or less inadequate. Many exegetes have written about the Gospels, but commentaries on them often contradict one another. They often disagree on dates. They may even disagree on more basic things. For instance, on some interpret passages in the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians to say that this letter is actually made up of 2 or 3 letters collated together. Furthermore, most commentators have either devoted themselves to the spiritual meaning of the Gospels or researched the testimonies of ancient authors and historians. Few, however, have paid close attention to the letter of the text. That is, few commentators have specifically studied geographical, calendaric, climactic, agricultural, and personal details found in the New Testament. Yet, these form the pieces of a giant puzzle. A systematic analysis and coherent classification of this information is the only way to find out what the Apostolic Church was like in the first century after Christ. This is the type of research that I completed in 1980. in my first important work of historical analysis. Footnote. Et Dieu vint, published at the Centre Jean Bart, 8 Rue de la Ville-l'Évêque, 75008 Paris, in 1980. Not available in English. Editor. I looked for, compared, and classified those kinds of details. Then I went through ancient testimonies and historians' writings, systematically sifting all those earlier approximations. Little by little, the events fell into place. I rejoiced when I discovered that it was possible to date them exactly and piece them together into a perfect, coherent whole. My research revealed that it is possible to unveil and shed light upon the way in which the Word of God rooted itself into history in the first century of the Church of Christ. This was just a matter of hard work. In this first important work, I paid special attention to the circumstances in which the four evangelists wrote the Gospel, each in his own way: Matthew the Galilean apostle, Mark the spiritual son of Peter, Luke the great reporter and Paul's friend, and John the beloved disciple. After establishing this historical chronology, though I still thirsted for more, I wanted to know more about the actual context of Jesus' life and his public ministry. For instance, I knew very little about Mary and the life of the Holy Family. I also did not know about the apostles and disciples. I did not know how the apostles and disciples slowly grew in their faith. I also knew very little about the role of women, which surfaces in the Gospels. As always, however, God did everything well. He never hides from those who seek him. In his providence, he gave me the means to go further ahead in my discoveries. These were the very means that I needed to quench my thirst. I was shown a very large document about Jesus' life, written by a poor, disabled Italian woman. She had suffered in bed for 27 years. Her name was Maria Valtorta. Maria Valtorta was born in Caserta, Italy, on March 14, 1897. She was drawn to Christ's sufferings at a very early age. She was bright and had a strong temperament. She was not gifted with an ability to perform complicated mathematical calculations. We will see later on how this proves to be interesting. She was wounded in 1920 at the age of 23. As her suffering increased throughout her life, she increasingly turned towards God. By April 1st, 1934, at the age of 37, she was confined to bed. In 1943, she began writing. It was her autobiography. Soon afterwards, she proceeded to record some visions that she had. She said that these, as well as dictations by Jesus or Mary, were revealed to her. Maria wrote in her own hand. She wrote intensely until 1947, especially during the years 1943 to 1946. At this time, an old missionary priest guided her. Then she wrote at a much slower pace until 1953. Her total output was some 15,000 handwritten pages. 2/3 of these concerned the Holy Family and Jesus' public ministry. She died on October the 12th, 1961, at the age of 64. She left us these words to remember her by: I am finished with suffering, but I will be filled with love forever. Maria Valtorta's main work was first published in Italy in 1956. The title was Il Poema dell'Uomo Dio. It has now been published throughout the world and is internationally known. Footnote. All translations, as well as the original, are published by the Centro Editoriale Valtortiano, CEV, at Isola dei Liri, Italy. The first volume of the English translation came out in early 1987. Unfortunately, the English title is The Poem of the Man God. First of all, the work is not a poem, and secondly, the title should read God-Man, not Man-God. As far as I know, my fellow translators were not responsible for this faulty title. Translator. It consists of a little over 700 scenes, which cover all of Jesus' life, especially his public ministry. I consider this work as the fifth gospel, an eminent prelate said. Thus he witnessed to the authentic coherence and deep, dazzling faith developments found in it. Footnote 3. Another prelate said, if anyone wishes to know the Madonna, let him read Maria Valtorta's Mariology. It is perfectly coherent with Vatican II Council. This was Father Roschini, who was an expert at the council. See the foreword of his work, La Madonna negli scritti di Maria Valtorta, Isola dei Liri, Italy, Edizione Pisani, 1973. Father Roschini's work will soon be published in English by Kolbe's Publications, editor. At first, I had some reservations about this work. I was all too aware of many mystifications by unscrupulous people. But the Church, which of course is always careful about things like this, had a significant reaction to Il Poema dell'Uomo Dio. Pope Pius XII, who was aware of its being written, received a complete typewritten copy shortly after it was finished. A few months later, on February 26, 1948, he summoned 3 priests to a special audience. One of them was Father Berti, who hoped to publish the work. The Pope said, "Publish this as is. Whoever reads shall understand." Pius XII recognized Maria Valtorta's work as a manifestation of God's mystery. Sometimes, indeed, God confers special privileges to individuals for the spiritual good of all. Despite this intervention by Pope Pius XII, Maria's work still meets with opposition in some quarters. I would like, therefore, to give a few arguments that will help the reader to understand that Pope Pius XII's decision was, after all, well-founded. The first point is that Maria Valtorta managed to write 15,000 pages as she suffered in bed for many years. This fact helps to reject the suggestion that it was a spiritual hoax on her part. A suffering person is unlikely to have energy for such a hoax. Furthermore, reliable witnesses say that the published work remains faithful to Maria Valtorta's manuscripts. The editors, serious churchmen, edited it with care. What we have then is really what she herself wrote, and not the work of some ghostwriters. Thus, this excludes the possibility of an ecclesiastical hoax, whereby theologians and learned people would have composed the work for her. Some, even sincere Catholics, may still have doubts about Maria's work. Is it an authentic revelation, or is it just the roaming imaginations of a suffering mystical soul? After all, her writings could have been no more than personal reactions to her religious upbringing. It is in this connection that a scientific approach to Maria Valtorta's work was timely. I thus began to analyze her writings with the same method that I had used in my previous historical research, which had yielded such positive results. First of all, I noticed that Maria Valtorta's work consists of over 700 scenes. More than 600 concerned Jesus' public ministry alone, which spanned approximately 1,200 days. This gives us an average of 1 scene every second day. I sought to determine whether it would be possible to use these writings to establish a precise chronology of Jesus' public ministry. There were 3 possibilities. 1. It might be possible to use Maria Valtorta's writings to establish a chronology that would be confirmed by all other historical data on the life of Christ. In this case, my test would be successful. We would have an excellent reason to disregard the possibility that Maria Valtorta's writings were the result of her own imagination. 2. It might be possible to use Maria Valtorta's writings to establish a chronology that was internally consistent, but would contradict known historical facts. 3. It might be impossible to use Maria Valtorta's writings to establish any kind of chronology at all. In the last 2 cases, my test would fail, since Maria Valtorta's writings would have little or no historical value. This, however, still would not mean that Maria Valtorta's writings were merely the fruit of her own imagination, since many mystical writings in the past did not have any particular historical value either. Furthermore, there is already evidence that Maria Valtorta's visions provide an accurate picture of Palestine in Jesus' time. She had never traveled to Israel or perused the literature of experts describing their archaeological finds. Her writings were not revised by anyone else. Therefore, there is no explanation for the archaeological and geographical accuracy of her writings except an intervention from the beyond. These factors exclude the possibility of a hoax or a mental disorder. I proceeded with my research and discovered that it was possible to establish the exact dates of the events described by Maria Valtorta. These dates do match all the historical data found in the Gospels and in other reliable sources. Her writings withstood the test of my complex analytical method, and my book reveals the chronology that I was able to derive. There is no way that Maria Valtorta could have composed thousands of pages of fiction that would be so historically accurate. She only obtained the average education of well-to-do girls in early 20th century Italy. She never went to university. She had no reference books at her disposal, except for the Bible and Pope Pius X's Catechism. In spite of this, some of the things that she wrote are only known by biblical scholars and experts on ancient Israel. She did not have a gift for long. Involved calculations. Yet, by our standards, the Jewish calendar in Jesus' time was rather complicated, and it is impossible that Maria Valtorta could have imagined, let alone chanced upon, all kinds of chronological details that would stand up to historical scrutiny. It is puzzling, however, that God should have given us a daily chronicle of Jesus' public ministry. Why did he not reveal it before? Judging from certain things that Jesus told Maria Valtorta, it would appear that our Creator has given us a special revelation because we are weak and corrupt creatures in a corrupt world. God loves us and wants to jar us from our apathy. Maria Valtorta's work, then, would deserve the vast attention that many Christians have already been paying to it.